which is going to be very exciting for everybody. It is about transparency. So for you who are familiar with the Paris Agreement, transparency is really the core issue of the Paris Agreement, because it is going to be a mechanism which is going to, I'm not saying a change, but at least going to be the next step to use reporting system, which used to be called MRV, and the transparency is very crucial to have. So in the context of climate change, transparency is related to the issue of reporting and review of relevant climate change information. So by having transparency, the process of this global mutually trusted processes will be very healthy one. And with the transparency, we are expecting to have global conversation transparently, and everybody can have a look what is the actions, whether the actions are generating impacts. So transparency has a very broad kind of perspective in terms of the implementation. So transparency is also collective effort. It's not one particular country, whether it's Annex 1 or non-Annex 1. Everybody will have to do that. And at the end of the day, the enhanced transparency framework will be in place. It is expected to be there by the end of 2024 to replace more or less the MRV system that has been used so far. So without further ado, I would like to start with this session, which is organized in collaboration between CIFOR-ICRAF and the COMIVAC, and with the University of Life Sciences in Norway. First, I would like to invite Mr. Harvey Moindu, the Executive Secretary of the COMIVAC, to give his opening remark for this important session.
Good morning, everyone. I am speaking in French. It's better. Je voudrais vous remercier très sincèrement pour cette session, pour laquelle vous avez répondu favorablement. Pour nous, la COMIFAC, c'est la Commission des forêts d'Afrique centrale. Nous travaillons avec les 11 États d'Afrique centrale, que sont l'Angola, Burundi, Cameroun, Centrafrique, Guinée équatoriale, Gabon, Rwanda, Sao Tomé et Principe et le Tchad. Et donc, dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre du plan de convergence de la COMIFAC, ces pays travaillent naturellement et ont développé leur readiness. Et dans le cadre de leur readiness, ils ont développé également l'aspect de transparence, la communication. En dehors de cela, dans notre communauté, nous travaillons également avec la Commission des États, économique des États d'Afrique centrale, qui est la CEAC, et pour aider les pays dont les financements climatiques à développer un hub régional climatique, pour que tous les États puissent être informés en temps réel de ce qui se passe. C'est pour cette raison que nous avons travaillé avec nos amis du CIFOR et également nos amis de l'Université d'Oslo pour pouvoir faire cette présentation qui va ouvrir un peu le débat sur comment est-ce qu'on peut améliorer la transparence dans le cadre de la gestion climatique. Et je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moidu. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Daniel Murdiarso. I'm with CIFOR-ICRAF, based in Bogor, Indonesia. So we will have a 1.5 hour session, and I would like to share with you how we are going to run this and expect your active interaction with the speaker. We have 6 speakers who are going to spend about 8 minutes each, and then we will have discussion amongst the speakers before the session is given to you all to interact and get information, clarification, or perhaps suggestion to the COMIFAC countries, especially the 11 countries that Mr. Moidu mentioned earlier. First of all, I would like to invite Christopher Marcius, who is going to share with us the data perspective for the transparency issue. This is very important, how data has a challenge and opportunity to enhance the transparency. Christopher is team leader on climate change and energy and low carbon development at CIFOR-ICRAF. Christopher. I will remind you when you are reaching the last 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Daniel, for the kind introduction. So we set up this session around transparency, as Daniel and also Hervé explained in the beginning. And I'm going to give a few ideas around the data perspective on this, and also framing the topic of transparency a little bit from our academic viewpoint as we are working on this subject. Just to remind everybody why we are here, this is the IPCC synthesis report from last March, and it says all global model pathways limiting warming to 1.5 degrees or maybe 2 degrees, in any case, involve rapid and deep, and in most cases, immediate greenhouse gas emissions reductions in all sectors this decade. And a commentary on this was every fraction of a degree matters, so clearly there is urgency and there is the need to draw down emissions as much as we can, as fast as we can, and we should go for all low-hanging fruit as much as we can. Universal participation is needed. That's another mantra. Let me put it like this. You can find this on the Together for Transparency website of the UNFCCC, from which I also have taken some slides. So universal participation means that's what the enhanced transparency framework was established for. Putting everybody in the same boat, putting everybody on the same page, and slowly ratcheting up the ambition and also the quality of the reporting. So the enhanced transparency framework says that next year, the first round of biannual transparency reports are due by countries, and this slide is also taken from the Together for Transparency website, shows how parties have different responsibilities to report. Between developed countries and developing countries, there are slight difference, but all parties, as you can see on the top left box, are supposed to submit national greenhouse gas inventories, and then they should undergo a technical review and facilitative multilateral consideration at the end. So this is very, very coarsely presented, the enhanced transparency framework. You can find those slides on the UNFCCC website. So this is the information that is supposed to be contained, and also that's taken from their website. So National Inventory Report of Anthropogenic Emissions Sources and Removals, then tracking progress of achievement of implementation and achievement of NDCs, then climate change impact and adaptation, finance, and capacity building, and basically these are the topics. So I'm going to focus in my presentation now on the first point, national inventory, and particularly the data view. In our work on transparency, we have looked at the topic of what does transparency mean. You start with wanting transparency and clarity, but that means you have to add a few things that are supporting this objective. So you work through all the data-related things that are in the blue boxes here is like accuracy, consistency, completeness of data, comparability. So you want to have data sets that compare to each other, that are on the same level, that complement each other so there are no gaps, and that also can also be reproduced in a scientific process, so which is basically the quality assessment. But you also have the green boxes here, which are more on the social side of things. Access and distribution, data access. Who has the access to data, who can read the data? Even if you have a website somewhere, can everybody go on it? Probably yes, but will they be able to understand it? That's maybe a different story. And then it leads to participation and at the end to equity, because that everything flows from having access to the data and then participating indigenous peoples, local communities, and so on. And at the end, so that is represented by this arrow here, at the end you get a responsibility and accountability, and that's what actually is what it is all about. So in the UNFCCC Enhanced Transparency Framework, only these 5 elements are actually being addressed formally. So transparency, accuracy, consistency, completeness, and comparability. So probably they assume that the other things are flowing from it, but that's not explicit. And I just wanted to make that clear because that frames our discussion a little bit. If we talk about forests, this is just again to remind everybody, forests are 11% of the mission of the mission sources, more or less. Could some people say, or some data say 15%. This is a global carbon project with data, average data from 2012 to 21. And forests are also the only actual sink that you can grow. There are ocean sinks. There is a sink in the atmosphere, which we don't want. So, but the forest sink is one we can grow. And that's maybe also setting the frame because we need to be clear that not everything can be achieved by working through forests as sometimes the impression is being made. Getting to the data situation for land use change, and forests. This is sort of an overview of the data situation. It's based on a paper by Viola Heinrich, who is in Geoforschungszentrum, the Geo Research Center in Potsdam. They are our partners working with us. And you see that the different bookkeeping models and other models and national greenhouse gas inventories provide very different data on the emissions. So the average of dynamic global vegetation models are in this blue chart, and you can see they're very high. They're around on average 4.6 gigatons every year. But already the bookkeeping models are much lower. And then if you go to FAO data, which is based on national reporting, it is much lower, which means there is a larger sink contained in it. If you go to country data, it's still lower. And if you go to an average Earth observation data set, global data set, average data set for I think 2001 to 2019, that's the WRI forest flux, that is very low, so that has a very large sink. The differences of between the first sets, the top sets of the models are understood. There is a discrepancy in particular in how forest sinks are, how managed forest sinks are defined, their incomplete national greenhouse gas inventories, and also forest management is not always well represented. But the differences from the FAO and country data to the WRI forest flux is still not fully understood. So this paper set out to look at this. And basically what it did is taking data, because it has to be solved at the country level. So we took country data where they are available, and there are not very many data available in a way that we can work with this data set. So one example is Brazil, and I want to say I'm singling out countries here, but that's not to shame or name anybody. It's just because these are our case studies. And in Brazil, you can see that different data sets give you a larger, relatively coherent source, more or less 7% different only, but large differences in the sinks. And that is related to how Brazil in their own data sets, and they have two. They have a national greenhouse gas inventory, and they have called something like called SEG, which is a slightly different data set. How they address removals in standing forests, remaining standing forests, and then what removal factors they use. So removal factors are nothing more than emission factors, but basically inverted because it's the removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. And then the extent of forest type. So we see that the sink differences in those data are already very, very big. And that's a problem, because if countries can define countries can define the managed forest data set in different ways, and that's one big part of the problem. So two more examples we took from Indonesia and Malaysia, and you can see again the yellow is the source and the blue is the sink. So in Indonesia, although in the source there are different assessments on the role of peat fires, but more or less the two assessments are equal, and also the sinks are equal. In Malaysia it looks different. The national GHG inventory gives a very large sink and a very little source, and the global Earth observation says different. So clearly we are not there yet in terms of comparability of these data, and basically being able to compare what all the countries are doing at the same level. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. I want to quickly jump into two more topics on the data situation. And these are not now necessarily related to the enhanced transparency framework, but they are interesting in terms of the overall question: every fraction of a degree matters. What can we do more quickly? And so the European Union and other countries like UK, US have issued policy around importation of deforestation-free commodities, which requires, in the case of the EU at least, that the land or the farm where a piece of commodity comes from can be identified, and it can be said, this kilo of palm oil came from that land and there is no deforestation. So that's the idea. And we have one PhD student also in Potsdam who is looking at that. What can be done with the data? They collected data from 50 countries already. There are up to 18 different crop type classes. There is an average of over 5 years, and it's Earth observation. And you can see in this graph that for only in very few countries for all these commodities, the complete data set would be available. Colombia and Ecuador in this case are singled out. In Africa, Central Africa is very, very, very punctual. Some data sets are there, like palm oil, always coffee in some, maize in some, and in Asia it still looks different. So it will be difficult to be done, and this should be done actually in the course of the next year, and it's complicated. So this shows where the data come from and how dense the data are for each region. And this is very preliminary data from that PhD, so it's not yet published. But basically the well-distributed crop types are covered by these data sets, but the more exotic, let me put it like this, agricultural commodities are not fully covered. And you see also, again, Brazil is well covered, Asia is well covered, in Africa is more spotty. So it will be difficult, and that's, I think it's a concern for countries wanting to continue to export to Europe. A third example I also want to touch on quickly, because that's recent work that we're doing, and because also this is sort of supposed to be the food system COP. A little bit, there is a push for food systems. Food systems are 30% of all emissions, between 24 and 42. We looked at 4 countries, and again, these are just examples. So China, Colombia, Vietnam, Kenya, you can see the food system emissions based on FAO data in the relative size of these 4 countries. So you see China is really big, and all the developing countries here are much, much smaller. You also see another thing, that when you look at these food systems, and food system really means from the pre-farm, the provision of fertilizer, seeds, machinery, and so on, to the post-farm, which is transport, processing, cooling, storage, and so on, and all the way to the household consumer, then you see large parts of the emissions are actually not in the agricultural production, but in the pre and post sections. For example, in China, household consumption is very big, food waste disposal is very big. But you see that food waste disposal, the red boxes are in all countries. So it's actually important. And if we look at this in terms of now we take the total country emissions as 100% for each country, so each country is looking at the same because it's 100%, then the food system emissions are bigger in some countries than others. But if we take only the pre and post-production part in the food system, then it looks surprisingly similar for these 4 countries. At least we're going to repeat that for more countries, but it's between 6 and 8% for other countries that we have these pre and post emissions. So can we afford to ignore 6 to 8% of the emissions? I think not. So I think this is really something that is worth looking into, but it will be hard because, first of all, the food loss and waste data, for example, we have from countries in the FAO database, they are not reliable at all. They're probably not real data. There are probably lots of assumptions. And then putting this back into a framework where NDCs are basically where countries are reporting in the NDCs under 4 categories: energy, transport, energy, waste, industry, and land use. Then food systems cut across all these 4 categories, so it will be another step to bring that.
You have to conclude, Chris.
Yeah. So just to come back to my framework, and sorry, I'm going a bit over time, but coming back to my framework, I added to the yellow stars that was where the UNFC was looking at, the red stars where the transparency framework still has something to do, and I think that's almost in all the fields, particularly access, distribution, participation, and equity. We don't see there a lot yet sufficiently done so that these things can move forward, and that's an urgent process for the next year to be stepped up. Okay. And so urgent climate action is needed. It makes sense to search for low-hanging fruit. Forests, but also other systems like food and others play a role in this. Transparency issues must be resolved, and better data coherence is at the bottom of it, but then a lot more needs to be done in terms of the social side of transparency, bringing communities in, and that's why we also have speakers from the communities in Africa, because we want to hear from them how they see it from their end, and that's the end. A few resources, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Let's give a big applause. Thanks. I hope it was the star of your hotel here in Dubai, but it was a lot of deficit. When we are talking about TAC, the principle in the UNFCCC, and thanks for bringing an example from Brazil and also Asia, not only from the land use forest sector, but also agriculture and food system. So let's move on with another topic that is going to be presented by Julia Sanchez Henkel, who is going to speak about the policy diagnostic framework on these transparency issues. Julia is a senior advisor at Rainforest Foundation, Norway. But before that, she was a CIFOR researcher and contributing a lot on the global comparative study on REDD+. And her current research is focusing on how the impact of forest conservation policy depends on context. And this is what she's going to share with us, how we can diagnose that in the context of transparency. Julia.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. So hello everyone, my name is Julia. What I will present today is a research that is part of the global comparative study of REDD+, a project by CIFOR. And the goal of the project, as Daniel said, is to really better understand the impact of forest policies, evaluate where they are implemented and in what type of context. So this comes a little bit in a later stage of the enhanced transparency framework, where it comes with to monitoring, tracking, and evaluating impacts. So what we know from the research literature is that the impact of policies depend on context. And this is something that comes again and again whenever we're trying to compare studies evaluating conservation policies. So what we try to do with this research is to come with more general lessons of what do we know about the difference in the impacts, the heterogeneity in the impacts. And we created a framework to be able to transmit those messages more clearly. So this is the deforestation diagnostics framework that we borrow from development economics theories. And the goal, the key question that we want to borrow from this is which policy measures are likely to work where to reduce deforestation in a given context, and with the goal to also explain why. So we know from theory that the same policy can have different implications depending on the context. There are three main elements in the deforestation diagnostics approach that we have developed. The first one is to identify and define different contexts. So this is the green columns. And how did we define the different archetypes? So these are the different contexts that we call archetypes. We basically analyzed long-term trends in deforestation from 2000 to 2020. We also analyzed deforestation rates. How have they changed before and after 2015? Have they increased? Have they decreased? So what are the trends? What are the drivers of deforestation? What are the direct land use replacing the forest? And what is the deforestation risk? So I'll show some maps later on how we define those contexts. Then the second element in the deforestation diagnostics framework is which are the policies that are being implemented. And for here in general, in the literature, we have three main types of policies. So we have the positive incentives, like payment for ecosystem services, REDD+. Then we have disincentives, which are negative incentives, like protected areas, fines for those who are breaching the law, with illegal deforestation, illegal logging. And the third one is enabling measure, which are the type of policies that are really have to be put into place, like clarifying land tenure in order to be able to implement those the incentives and disincentives. The third stage is reviewing the evidence base. And for here, we conducted a literature review, only selecting the studies that have good impact evaluations, so that have generated counterfactual, and that are looking at heterogeneity in the impacts of the same policy. So unsurprisingly, there are few studies that are doing this in a rigorous manner, and I'll show the key lessons that we can draw, at least for now. So these are the deforestation archetypes in Africa. So as I've mentioned, these include, how did we define them? We like historical deforestation, deforestation rates before and after 2015, and so on. So I won't get into the details of the methodology, but what I want to highlight is here, we define two archetypes that are characterized by having conserved their forest in the last 20 years and have low deforestation rates. So these, we are calling them core landscapes or moderate forest landscapes, under the colors in green. So these could be the landscapes where we see high forest cover, low deforestation consistently in the last 20 years. Then we have the deforestation fronts. So these are the areas in yellow, red, purple, and we see here how some countries are dominated by those deforestation fronts, and they're close as well to the core landscapes. The difference here is that we have all deforestation fronts are those that have reduced deforestation rates in the last few years. Persistent deforestation fronts are the ones that have not managed to reduce their deforestation rates before and after 2015. We're using 2015 just as a reference point. So recently, of the policies that have been implemented, where have we actually seen deforestation decrease? This is just another example. So we did it at the global level. So this is the case for Latin America. And we see very clearly the arc of deforestation. A lot of, if we compare to Africa, and I'll just go back, in Latin America, we see more old deforestation fronts, somehow consistent with what we have seen, where deforestation rates have gone down, and a lot of persistent fronts as well, more closer to the core forests, so to the green areas. Then what we did, we analyzed the direct drivers. So this is what is the land use that is replacing only in the deforestation fronts. And we see how the dominance varies significantly across the continents. So in Latin America, we have pasture, cattle, the main driver, and the pink area is cropland, so soy. And we have those areas where it's grass shrubland that we also are associating to mining activities or other type of activities that are not necessarily agricultural. In Africa, we see a dominance of grass shrubland. We relate it to the smallholder farming / and burn agriculture. And in Asia, Southeast Asia, we see the dominance of plantations. So what this allows is that we have this all this analysis in one single comparative global data set. Then with the core forests, so the areas that have conserved, that have had low deforestation in the last years and have high forest cover still to this day, we define deforestation risks. So the deforestation risks was defined in terms of accessibility. So how easy is it to get to the urban, to the nearest urban center, and the agricultural suitability. So this is assuming there's a low input agriculture. And the blue color shows the areas where there's high agricultural suitability but low accessibility. So these are potentially at risk if we see more infrastructure development, for example, or greater access to these areas, because they're going to be very attractive for agriculture activities. The areas in pink are the ones that have low deforestation risk because they are less suited for agricultural land. And then we see either it's peatland areas or high elevation. So then the second element of the deforestation diagnostics approach was revising the policy, so revising the evidence of what do we know about how the impact of policies varies according to the context. And there, what we see is that first, there's few studies, and most of them are only evaluating protected areas. So we know a lot about the impacts of protected areas, how the impact of protected areas varies according to context, but also policy implementation. Then we have a little bit more knowledge with payment for ecosystem services, but all the other type of interventions, they're just, so we have 8 good studies, and it's a mix of interventions, right? So there's a knowledge gap there to better understand what drives effective deforestation policies. So, and the spatial coverage, it's broad, and it covers at least the main rainforest areas. And then what can explain the impact? It's both the context as well the design and implementation, and this is something that we examined. So now I'm coming to the last slide. As a summary, so this is the framework that we're adopting. And the key overall message that we find is, at least for the studies where we have evidence of PES and protected areas, the forest intervention achieve greater conservation results when they are implemented in the areas that have high deforestation pressure or risk. For greater policy impact, so what we need is a targeted forest policy, so to tailor a little bit better the policies and have PES in the areas where the opportunity costs are higher, where deforestations are higher. There's been some lack of, diminished potential of those policies because they're not implemented in the areas where we see the greatest deforestation, so the deforestation fronts. And then the third overall message is we see a knowledge gap, so the breadth and scope of the heterogeneity analysis of those studies is limited. So there's still a lot to learn in terms of what are the best, what are the implementation and design factors that are affecting policy impact. And that's.
Thank you, Julia. Let's give her a big applause. If I want to put it in a simple language, when we have small kids who's got temperature up, we do this, right? oh, you have temperature up. Or use thermometer. Even if it is digital, it's only the symptom. What Julia's describing here is not just the symptom, trying to diagnose what's the cause of the high temperature. So with those colors, 7, 8 different land use, it's not only telling us the cause, it's not only telling us the temperature, but also the cause, why it becomes, different type of land use right now. So the issues related to economic, social issues are embedded in what is been diagnosed instead of just temperature. So that's in a simple language. I hope that explains what the diagnostic framework is going to be used across the globe, especially in the tropics. So without further ado, I would like to invite Gervais Itso Monsus to speak on the experience in Central Africa, how this transparency framework has been implemented, especially in the climate reporting. Yes?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for the floor. We have just 8 minutes, I think, so that we don't lose more time. I'm Gervais Ludovic Itomadou. I'm the
Sorry, I have not introduced you properly. Gervais was the former Secretary General of COMIVAC, so he's very familiar with the issue in the region.
Okay, thank you very much. I was the Deputy Executive Secretary and Technical Coordinator 2 years ago already. So I'm actually IPCC Vice Chair of Working Group 3, and I'm coordinating the Regional Climate Action Transparency Hub for Central Africa State. Can we go, or someone can help me? Or
Julia, can you click?
Ah, yes.
Clicker.
Okay. So, as stated by the Executive Secretary right now, all Central Africa State countries are part of and ratified UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, and we have this Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. And the issue is that Central Africa countries have encountered difficulties in responding to the current UNFCCC MRV, and it's necessary then to acquire sustainable and comprehensive institutional arrangement and operational system to deal with ETF. And then the objective of creating the Regional Climate Action Transparency Hub is to create a center of expertise in the region and assess the need and priorities for each country, build capacity in Central Africa State for all stakeholders, create a network of experts and national officials, disseminate tools and guidelines to support transparency. Also, we need to support resource mobilization. So, we already started 1 year ago. What you can talk about the methodology. We started of a gap analysis assessment for all our countries at regional level and country level. We started to share on methodology, such a questionnaire online to all stakeholders in the region. And the questionnaire were presented and discussed during December regional workshop with the conclusion of this feedback received from stakeholders. And then the questionnaire was structured based on thematic scope on transparency. As we can see, we have GSG, mitigation action, support, wider impact, adaptation, and climate scenario, risk and vulnerability. And then we have also these capacity building areas. The objective is there is a governance system in place, regulations, institutions. There is expertise on each thematic area. Let's just talk about data flows. We assess also how these are in the place, if there are systems and tools, and also if there is stakeholder engagement to meet ETF on each thematic area. And here we have this kind of matrix that show the feedback that we received at regional level based on the needs and thematic areas and the area of capacity building. We can see governance, data flow, expertise. And where we are red, this means that it is the urgent action that we need to take to address this in the region. Okay, after having this at regional level, countries during the steering committee requested the regional coordination of the hub to go in deep in countries, because if you keep it at regional level, sometimes it can skip reality in each country. And then, so we already have 9 out of 11 countries. We had a national workshop on capacity building, on transparency, and also we have developed action plan for each country to address all these thematical areas that have been identified on. And then we have here a range of stakeholders that participated on this survey. Regional organization, government, institution of research, university, CSO, and so on. You can see that government had like 40% from government also, but we have CSO and private sector that participated in the survey. So one thing is that the Regional Climate Action Transparency Hub enjoy a high level of political commitment and ownership based on review of challenges and initial result. The last conference of head of state asked the project to be transformed into a regional program, because we are currently working with ICAT resources as a project for 3 years, but based on that, it said, no, we need to have a program, not just a small project. And then, based on this work, we can see that Central African countries can meet the ETF if we work to improve the legal and regulatory framework, set up a tool and system to facilitate the flow of information, of data, develop human resources quantitatively and qualitatively. Also, as you know, we are in the UNFCCC. It will be based on no punitive, non-intrusive basis with strict respect to the circumstances and sovereignty of states. So we need to work to avoid duplication among technical and financial partners, because we can see that there are many things ongoing but are not coordinated. And then this action plan that will be developed at national level will help the countries to really try to avoid these duplications. Also, we are interested to explore how the existing resources in Africa can be used to implement national action plan that can be prepared by the hub. And then also the hub is intended to be a collaborative framework, bridging together Central African states and various institutions, technical and financial partners involved and interested in building sustainable and comprehensive climate action transparency framework in the region. I think that together we can meet this challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gervais. Skip applause. So the keywords here is collaborative effort. And certainly organization like CIFOR-ICRAF can be a place to go where we can support countries in the COMIFAC region. It's very interesting to see how gap analysis was used as the planning or beginning of the planning session. This is a good way of starting implementation of transparency. Okay, well, the next speaker we have here in the row is Liv-Jon Fosse, who is going to... Oh, sorry, I didn't see you came in. Not yet. Jill Mohire, welcome. Mochire. Yes. She's from the IPLC network in Central Africa, so indigenous people and local community, who is going to share with us the importance of IPLC in this climate reporting. So this is part of the nut and bolts that we should not miss, how IPLC is involved in the process. Yale.
Bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis M. Diel Mochire Mwenge. Je suis du Repaleac, qui est soutenu par la COMIFAC via les projets GZ appui à la COMIFAC. On va parler beaucoup plus de la question de la transparence, mais je voudrais commencer par une petite vidéo pour comprendre les acquis des savoirs traditionnels. Yes. Oui.
Concession forestière de la communauté locale, CFSL Kisimbosa, président Mukumbwa Majaliwa Théodore. Tata Kordo Pidep Itongwa Mukumo Joseph, nous Tata Mushumbi Mukumo Nicolas, Mochire Mwenge Diele Timaluke.
Hapa nyuma hivi unapiga piga hapa.
Hii ndio orchestra sasa, ile mikoko ndio sembale yetu ya asili ya kukoleza ile lukumbi na ngoma pamoja.
Na wakati gani mnapiga ngoma?
Wakati si aizuru wakati yote tunacheza kwa wakati ya kufurahisha Bangkoko, bajue kama tuko hapa muudongo yetu ya Kisimbosa.
Lakini mnakuwa na muziki mbalimbali yenye iko na maana yake.
Ndio.
Na chale muziki gani?
Tuliimba ya kwanza tunasema twabakaja sambalingo. Ile samba ni kusema kukaribisha wageni wenye kufika hapa kwetu Lupito, tufurahi nao pamoja. Samba.
Mbote na biso lisusu. Mbote. Nazuma loba na kombo ya secrétaire général Monsieur Claude Kalala Maïmala. Asengai kozala na biso awa. Nyonso zalaki déjà fin prêt. Mais na ngonga ya suka mokonzi biso ministre VPM ya intérieur. Bien. Asengaki atikala na Kisasa on a moins urgence moko komaki. Mais la prochaine fois, la 4e édition, ce qui est sûr, à cause de la biso. Le ministre Azali pour encourager la communauté locale, le peuple autochtone pygmée, la pratique yaboé. Et que Mokondi Mboka, son excellence Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Chilombo, Azali pour encourager l'initiative du peuple autochtone. Nanzela on a yangona tozoki mipeko oyo. Loi numéro 22/030 du 15 juillet 2022 portant protection et promotion des droits des peuples autochtones pygmées.
C'est pour moi un grand plaisir de venir et de se retrouver dans cette bourgade de Lufito, Bananingi, située en groupement et secteur de Bakano, qui reçoit des différents visiteurs venus de partout en vue de participer à la cérémonie qui s'inscrit dans le cadre du mois des peuples autochtones pygmées, dont la date de sa célébration est du 9 août de chaque année, selon lesquelles plusieurs activités seront organisées sur place, marquées de journées locales, agro, sociaux, traditionnelles, comme a été pour la seconde fois au mois de juillet écoulé en 2022. pour votre gouverne, laisse-moi vous dire que ce peuple jadis négligé est aujourd'hui protégé par la loi numéro 22/030 du 15 juillet 2022 portant protection et promotion des droits des peuples autochtones pygmées en République démocratique du Congo.
Thank you. Do you have any more comments, Mr. Mochire?
Merci beaucoup de suivre ces petites vidéos. C'était en termes d'illustration. Et pour nous, nous avons toujours dit que la nature offre à l'homme tout ce qu'il a besoin. Et nous avons le droit de la conserver et de la protéger. La nature, c'est nous. Et nous, c'est la nature. Les Repaléacs, c'est tout un réseau qui travaille dans 8 pays d'Afrique centrale, dans le bassin du Congo, et qui a cette possibilité de rendre compte à tous les niveaux. On est à cet endroit. Ce n'est pas parce qu'on voudrait prendre l'avion, mais plutôt pour faire attendre la voix des Africains et plus particulièrement les bassins du Congo et prendre en compte les questions des peuples autochtones qui sont les gardiens des forêts et des savanes où ils pratiquent les rituels. Nous sommes très ravis de l'événement parce que la question de la transparence, nous sommes aujourd'hui au 28e COP, donc il y a à peu près 28 ans qui est dépassé. Et chaque jour, il y a des négociations et des promesses. Et quand nous, on fait la restitution, on pose la question, les promesses restent promesses. Mais quand ces promesses-là seront vues par les communautés autochtones pour continuer à sauvegarder ces forêts? Quelquefois, on a des réponses à dire, attendons, il y a les fonds Bezos qui est là, qui s'est déjà mobilisé à travers certains partenaires. Il y a la Tenir Facility, par exemple, il y a les RRI, mais il y a d'autres partenaires tels que la RFN, Norway, qui a continué à appuyer ces processus depuis des années. Mais nous sommes en train de nous dire que dans les 8 pays, essentiellement, la question de la reconnaissance légale des peuples autochtones est un des éléments de la transparence en lien avec les changements climatiques. Si on prend par exemple au Burundi, même dans la Constitution c'est reconnu, on doit avoir des députés et des sénateurs. En RDC, il y a déjà une loi. Au Congo, Brazza, c'était le tout premier pays à avoir une loi spécifique, mais qui a connu des petits soucis en lien avec les mesures d'application. Mais aujourd'hui, les mesures d'application sont là. Nous avons aujourd'hui, au niveau du Gabon, une sénatrice au compte des peuples autochtones. Au niveau du Rwanda, on sait qu'il y a assez de problèmes en lien avec la terminologie, mais nous sommes restés un et indivisibles en tant que peuple autochtone du bassin du Congo, quelle que soit la manière dont on peut nous appeler. C'est pour cette raison que je voudrais conclure que la paix n'a pas de prix. Tout ce que nous pouvons faire ici, mais si nos communautés autochtones continuent à être massacrées, continuent à être déplacées dans leurs zones, tel est le cas par exemple de l'Est de la RDC, c'est juste un exemple, mais il y en a dans plusieurs pays où vivent les peuples autochtones. Les extractions minières qui ne respectent pas les lois du pays, où on nous expulse, il y a des accaparements de terres. Pour nous, nous pensons qu'avec la COP et les engagements qui sont faits par les États, à travers les mécanismes qui sont mis en place, vraiment c'est un souhait pour nous que ces mécanismes soient plus vite et comme nous sommes avec la COMIFAC qui représente autant de pays au sein du bassin du Congo, pour nous ça serait une opportunité d'aller de l'avant. La question de la transparence, il y a plusieurs composantes là-dedans et je ne voudrais pas beaucoup plus m'y atteler parce que nous savons tout ce qui se passe. Mais en tout cas, dans les négociations, si vous nous aidez à mobiliser même la question liée à la paix pour sauvegarder la faune et la flore sur les territoires autochtones, sauvegarder notre culture, ça va nous aider à être stables sur nos territoires où nous avons tout. Je dis et je vous remercie.
Well, we apologize for the interpretation which did not work as we expected, but it was very clear, especially for me who cannot understand from the video. Certainly, transparency is going on in the ground-based activities, in the grassroots system, negotiation and things like that, and it tells us that it is a matter of transparency for people on the ground. So it's an important part of the negotiation, especially in Central Africa. And since Norway was mentioned, Liv John, and I believe you will share with us also how your work, especially as advisor of the Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiative, will help, especially not only on the financial issue, but also the accountability of the contribution, especially for local community, biodiversity, and climate change.
Thank you. And as a social anthropologist born in Cameroon, I enjoyed that video thoroughly. And I also take this opportunity to congratulate DRC and the indigenous peoples in DRC with the IP law, the Indigenous Peoples Law, which was adopted back in 2022. That's a great step forward for what I'm going to talk about now. Just on the matter of transparency, and I'll make that short because I'm very much a layman in that field. Before today, I thought the enhanced transparency framework was more or less about, how we will report in different ways for the Paris Agreement, as opposed to what we did for the UNFCCC, and how these things connect. So today, let me offer a different perspective on transparency, more related to funding for reducing emissions from tropical forests, and even more specifically for donor support for the climate and biodiversity actions of exactly those indigenous peoples and local communities. So if you remember back to Glasgow, when a number of bilateral donors and philanthropies at COP26 committed to spend $1.7 billion by 2025 on the land rights and forest guardianship of indigenous peoples and local communities, donors also committed to increase transparency and accountability around funding and partnering with IPs and LCs, sorry about the abbreviations, in decision-making around that funding. This happens under the auspices of the Forest 10-Year Funders Group, initially led by the COP26 host, United Kingdom, currently led by the Ford Foundation, a philanthropy, and with Norway leading that effort in 2024. Now, apart from reporting on the delivery of that funding, and you can read for yourself how we have gone about that, we have increased funding, not as much as it should be is direct funding, but we are working on that. So as part of that, and we are taking inspiration from another group of parties in exactly the indigenous peoples and local communities. In this case, organized under the auspices of the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities. They have formulated a set of principles and expectations for the donors. And so, while I'm not putting our sort of response to that up there because we are still discussing it amongst ourselves, well, I'll keep that. Okay, that was difficult. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So, as donors, we take inspiration from those messages from the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. And so, what we have in mind, but still haven't finalized as part of our work as donors, here are some ideas for input by everyone, basically, for how we should respond to that ask from indigenous peoples and local communities for more direct, more accountable, more transparent funding. So, donors will want to create, protect, and expand opportunities for meaningful dialogue with representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities. We want to ensure individual and collective donor support is holistic and sustainable, not ad hoc. We want to progressively expand our support to partners or funding mechanisms that channel the bulk of the funding to organizations led by indigenous peoples and local communities, to formally include indigenous peoples and local communities in decision-making and governance, and measures that are committed to gender equality, inclusive representation of women, youth, and marginalized collectives. Or further, ensure that all support for indigenous peoples and local communities is designed and delivered in partnership with those very same target groups. Furthermore, to build indigenous peoples' capacity to access and manage external funding, to leverage our political influence for land use reforms beyond funding. This could, for instance, happen through the political forum for following up the Glasgow declarations, the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, which is a high ambition coalition of countries that commit to these donor pledges and want to see action on the ground in the countries. We also want to take steps to reduce unnecessary administrative barriers to funding, which is a key demand from Global Alliance. We want to work to improve access to multilateral climate funds. We want to improve donors' collaboration and coordination, improve our data systems, how we count what we do, because just getting an overview of what we distribute and in what channels is quite a challenge for quite a few donors. And perhaps most importantly, we want to help keep indigenous peoples and local communities' role as guardians of the forest and nature on the global agenda. Again, about systemic reporting, we want to periodically review our portfolios against these principles and practices and report annually, as we did just last Friday. That's the previous slide. We report annually on donor progress on delivering on those principles and showing what direction we're going. So in Norway's case, if I still have some time, I might not, I'm fair. In Norway's case, securing land rights and forest guardianship has been a key priority since NICFI, the Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiative, was set up back in 2008. This has, over the years, involved direct funding to indigenous peoples' organizations such as Tebteba in the Philippines, AMAN in Indonesia, ONIC and OPIAC in Colombia, IDESEP and CONAP in Peru, AAPB and COIAB in Brazil, and so on. As well as many others, through supporting organizations directly accountable to indigenous peoples and local communities, such as the Tenure Facility and the Rainforest Foundation Norway, as well as Rainforest Foundation US and UK. This has mostly happened through a NORAD climate and forest funding scheme, which goes back all the way to 2009. Now, in either case, it's an important thing for donors to help build capacity in the organizations, given our donor regulations, to build capacity in the organizations to manage funds accountably, so as to be able to seek more and larger funds from other sources, including philanthropies and eventually national financing mechanisms, such as the Amazon Fund in Brazil, equivalents in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, and more recently Indonesia with the Nusantara Fund just set up. So the latter has been a key approach in specialist programs, such as the Norwegian Indigenous Peoples Program in Brazil, which has for the last 40 years worked to support and build capacity in indigenous peoples organizations so that they can advocate and defend their territorial rights, including under difficult times, as we saw just a few years back in Brazil. This approach has included providing seed money for indigenous peoples funds for management of their territories, such as Fundo Podali, Fundo Casa, and Fundo Rio Negro. These are examples of territorial funding mechanisms, which are a key channel for the Global Alliance, we just saw, that are likely to go to scale over the next few years. In the context of the Shandia vision, which is a holistic vision according to the worldview of the indigenous peoples and local communities for how they want to access funding and how they want to see it delivered by donors and partners. So, increased direct funding needs to be an outcome of the Glasgow commitments, even if the numbers, unfortunately, just yet goes to prove that we are just starting to deliver on that ambition. Now, based on this experience, Norway finds that direct funding may be a good option for indigenous peoples and local community organizations that have built the capacity and the necessary fiduciary and organizational capacities to manage, official development assistance or philanthropic funds, which often, especially in the case of ODA, come with very strict regulations, which are not helpful to indigenous peoples and local communities, but they are there for reasons about accountability to our home publics. So not very easy to reform. Norway does, however, in addition to direct funding, see a continued role for intermediary organizations such as the Rainforest Foundations or the tenure facility and so on, similar accountable organizations, to continue to provide support to indigenous peoples and local community organizations, because that would, apart from helping them achieve more than they would be able to do on their own, would also relieve the indigenous peoples and local community organizations of the necessity to manage, report to bilateral donor funding agency and all the complications and rules and regulations that come with that. In that way, these organizations could focus on their core mission of representing their constituencies, advocating their rights, and managing territories according to their traditional knowledge and spiritual connection to the land, rather than struggling to conform to OECD, DAC rules, nomenclature, and terminology. So, in conclusion, connecting the dots in the international financing architecture for indigenous peoples and local communities, how we want to connect that to national governments that perhaps may want to reform land use in order to deliver on their nature and climate commitments, and connecting both of these parties with international funding instruments. That is a key challenge for the Forest Tenure Funders Group and the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, as we report on progress on delivering on the Glasgow Forest Tenure Place. This work will be led by Norway in 2024 in close cooperation with that Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, all speakers. And I'm afraid we only have limited time for question and answer, but we will pick maybe one or two burning questions, please. Please identify yourself and to whom your question is directed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair of this science. I'm Vital Bambanze. I'm from Burundi, Central Africa. I'm also a member of the UN Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. Yes, I'm from indigenous peoples of Burundi called the Batwa. Maybe my colleague DL is going to apologize for me because I'm going to try to speak my English because you don't have interpretation. I was to speak in French where I feel more comfortable. And DL maybe also forgot to say that the government of Burundi is also doing some efforts to promote indigenous peoples, especially in nominating. No, I'm okay. I can interpret. I can translate after. Thank you so much. She was asking me if she could maybe assist me in interpreting. After that, I can maybe say that in French. But I know most of the French speakers know what I'm going to do. To say, I'm sorry. I was saying that in Burundi is a country where indigenous peoples are recognized, and we are participating in decision-making, beginning by in government, because we have a Minister of National Solidarity. She's not here. And she's also in charge of human rights. So, and
can you please straight to your questions?
Yes, I'm going to straight my question. It is just to say what we are doing in some countries. And as I'm speaking, I'm a former senator. This means that there are some countries that are promoting the rights of indigenous peoples and letting them participating. What I was to say is just to thank again for COMIFAC and the panelists, especially the Norway, I think, for the efforts that they are making to promote specifically the indigenous people's rights in supporting some activities. What I would like to say is, yes, now we are benefiting from some activities, but on international level it is okay. But when we see what is being done on grassroots, there are some efforts that must be needed to do. So how can you, in terms of capacity building, try to emphasize efforts to strengthen the capacity building of organizations working with indigenous peoples so that they can continue to support and then collaborate or partnership with different stakeholders. And finally, what is happening is we are speaking about the climate change, but the deal came back on the security and peace. And now most of funds now are being moved in countries where it is said that there is insecurity, for example, in Ukraine, in Gaza now, and somewhere. But for example, in Great Lakes, most of indigenous peoples are suffering from crisis or insecurity, and they are victims of wars, especially in the DRC of Congo. We know that there is a war for many years, but the issues of indigenous peoples who are victims of these wars are not taken into consideration. How can we link these issues of climate change and peace and security? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it was a comments and general comment to the speakers. But if you have any feedback.
Yeah, if that's for me, I think the science is clear that the indigenous peoples and forest-dependent local communities are certainly the most effective guardians of the forest and many ecosystems. We have increasing evidence for that, which is beginning to be recognized in both the IPCC and the IPBES, which, you know, that's the reason why donors are rallying behind this, the Glasgow Pledge, to do something about, to make sure that we steer our support more toward that sort of management of ecosystems and forests. So, yeah, while I will not go into commenting on the situation in specific countries, the evidence base is there for very clearly for Latin America, but increasingly also for Asia and Africa, that, you know, strengthening the land rights and indeed the general human rights of indigenous peoples and local communities will deliver more effective management of forests, at times even more effective than protected areas. Because this idea that forest needs to be devoid of people is not scientifically proven anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Liv John. I do not want to summarize, sorry, gentlemen, we are running out of time. And I do not want to summarize or conclude what we've been talking about since we are running out of time. Instead, I would like to invite our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Elian Ubalijoro, to give a closing remark.
I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. I think from following up from COP15, where we really have had that interface of biodiversity and coming to COP28 and climate, how we're looking at transparency and climate discussions reporting is really critical, and bringing in the indigenous perspectives has to be central to this work. So I'd like to thank my colleagues at CIFOR-ICRAF on the panel who have contributed to organizing this, as well as organizers from COMIFAC and the University of Life Sciences, NMBU in Norway for this session, and I'm thankful to the contributions from the Climate Action Transparency Hub of the Central African States and Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative. International organizations like CIFOR-ICRAF are available to play a role in enabling data and evidence for our partner countries so that the needed actions discussed today can achieve full data and methods ownerships to increase transparency and trust. We're all here because transparency and trust is so critical to the work we have to do and to really meeting the climate and biodiversity and social community needs that we know need to be achieved. We would like to work collectively as trusted partners with countries, with communities, with indigenous communities and local communities to really address the urgent climate action that is needed, and reducing every fraction of a degree matters. It is therefore makes sense to search for low-hanging fruit where emissions can be reduced the fastest. Forests play a really critical role in this regard in preserving the biodiversity and ecosystem services that underpin the global land and climate systems functioning. but forests are also centrally important for livelihoods and nutrition, for 2.4 billion people globally, and for their adaptation to an already ongoing climate change. So to speed up emissions reductions, transparency issues must be resolved. Better data coherence can increase trust and accountability. Data access and participation must be improved. Research, including Earth observation data to produce data and evidence, and working with citizen science, can continue to be important to underpinning the sectoral approaches to reduce emissions. And so I'd like to thank all our panelists today and for all of you who took the time to run from wherever you were here at COP28. You know, we know it's not easy getting from one place to the other, and we just thank you for coming here and look forward to being with you either here in the next coming days here in Dubai or working with you in the future. Thank you for your work.
With that, the session is closed. Thank you very much, everybody.
gentlemen, let me welcome you on behalf of the UNFCCC on a side event accelerating NDC implementation and addressing global stock take outcomes through technology needs assessment. We are happy to first of all, that we were able to organize this side event based on the work Secretariat is doing with the technology mechanism bodies, with the Technology Executive Committee, Climate Technology Center Network, with our contributions, which we were able to do through TNAs to NDC process, to GST process, and I'm very happy we have these good speakers with us. We will do the event in 2 tranches. First, we will have expertise in TNA, NDC, and GST processes presented to you, and then the second, we will hear some concrete experiences from least developed countries who are here with us, and also we will hear from a Green Climate Fund on their options and possibilities how to support these processes. You all agree with me if I say our main priority here is to enhance implementation of climate technology, and being privileged to work longer time with the Secretariat and all these partners, I know all these processes are concretely supporting countries, especially LDCs and developing countries, in enhancing the implementation or better gap between their needs and realized projects. So our first speaker, and I'm happy to have him here, is a chair of Technology Executive Committee and our dear colleague Stig Svenningsson, and he will provide an opening to this event. Please, Stig.
Thank you very much, Vladimir, and good afternoon, dear guests, distinguished speakers, and participants. Let me welcome you all to this side event focusing on accelerating NDC implementation and addressing global stock take outcomes through technology needs assessments. At the core of the Paris Agreement lies the nationally determined contributions, which are steering us towards achieving the agreement's long-term objectives. However, numerous developing countries encounter formidable obstacles in meeting their NDC targets, primarily due to restricted access to advanced climate technologies and also financial resources. The technology needs assessment process, mandated under the UNFCCC, plays a vital role in aiding developing countries to identify and prioritize their technological requirements for climate mitigation and adaptation. The TNAs serve as a strategic mechanism to facilitate the transfer and deployment of requisite technologies in these nations, and thereby fortifying the attainment of their NDC objectives. The global stocktake, an integral part of the Paris Agreement, undertakes the critical task of evaluating collective progress towards the agreement's overarching goals. This is done by harmonizing NDCs with TNAs to support the global stocktake process and harnessing its insights. Nations are better positioned to discern, prioritize, and implement climate technologies effectively. Such an alignment not only enhances the efficiency of the NDCs, but also fosters international cooperation, capacity building, and the mobilization of resources essential for the deployment of climate technologies. Such collaborative efforts may propel us forward in our collective response to the pressing challenges posed by climate change. Throughout this side event, we aim to explore synergies between NDCs, TNAs, and the global stocktake, and how this alignment can catalyze transformative actions. Our focus will revolve around experiences in implementing innovative strategies, collaborative approaches, and deployment of climate technologies. I would like to give a warm welcome to our speakers whose expertise and contributions will enrich our dialogue today. And let's further explore ways to accelerate NDC implementation and effectively address the global stocktake outcomes through the technology needs assessment process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stig, for your kind words and introducing this event. Our first speaker is Sarah Traerup,
who has, she has an experience in project management, and of course she had also experience in research and advisory-based work in the field of climate change technologies and sustainable development.